This is part 4 in a series of videos in which I'm attempting to repair this Olympia ESW 100-KSR electronic typewriter. In the previous videos I went through the electronics, sorted out a few problems. We had a fault with the power supply and then we had some issues with the main board due to damage from leaking batteries. So I fixed all that and that's now all working fine. And in fact it was working and printing perfectly. It would respond to all the keys, and I'd got as far as starting to test the serial port on this. So this, although it's a typewriter, it has a serial port and it was often used as kind of a dumb terminal. So you can see that the printing was fine, even it was even responding to serial commands. I don't have the manual for this, so I don't know how to access the setup and the proper serial communications for it. I suspect there's a setup mode you can put it into, because there are no jumpers on the main board to set baud rates and that sort of thing. So I suspect that part of the battery backed RAM is to hold the configuration data, and that has to be sent through the serial communications port. I can't find any keys that would seem to indicate we can access that on the local machine. Normally you have like a mode switch and you can go into the various configuration, but I can't find that on this machine. But that aside, as I say, it was printing fine, but as you can see there is now another issue with this. I'll just move the camera across and explain the current situation. So as you can see, I've removed the print carriage, and the reason I've done that is although it was working initially, it wouldn't feed the tape at all. The part of the mechanism that drives that was completely jammed up. Again, just congealed grease, but I freed that up and it then started working. The tape just feeds one character position each time it prints a character, so this just advances every time a key is struck, and that is driven through a fairly complex mechanism. We've got this motor that drives it, but there are a series of gears and cams and whatever and springs underneath here, and the reason it's so complex is it works in lots of different ways depending on exactly what it's doing. One of the very clever features of this typewriter is it has an erase feature. So it's a true erase. When you hit a key, you'll print a character, and if you want to, you can actually remove that printing from the paper. So it kind of uses like a sellotape system. This is these yellow parts. If you hit a character and you decide you want to delete it, and what you do is you hit the delete key on the keyboard. It backs the carriage up and you then hit the same key. I think it's automatic on this one. It will just go back and retype the same character that you just typed, but it uses the sellotape reel instead of the inked ribbon, and what happens is it kind of removes the top layer of the paper, kind of tears it away and leaves blank paper underneath, so it kind of deletes the character and you can type whatever you want. But all that has to be catered for by this mechanism depending on what the machine wants to do. So we've got these electromagnets at the front that are used to control the mode that it wants to drive. So it either drives the ribbon or it drives the delete tape, or it does neither depending on the mode it's in. But this is all driven from this single motor. So the way this is arranged is this gear. It's not actually used to drive anything. I think this is just for kind of manual drive. This sits on top of the motor, so there's kind of a flat section on the motor shaft, so that sits on there. And then on top of that we have this gear, so it's a tall thin gear, and this engages with all the gears. There's a stack of gears here that are used to drive these mechanisms, but they're all driven from this common gear. And at the bottom end of this is a very spindly arrangement with some cutouts in it that sits in the, or should sit in the top of this black gear. So it should go into that gear, and then this can drive this. but as you can see, the bottom has snapped off, so that's what should be attached to this part. Now it doesn't appear to have just snapped. The bottom end of it is kind of crumbling away, so I think what's happened is the plastic, chances are some lubricant was put on this at some point, some grease or something, and it's eaten away the plastic. It's another thing is with plastics you very rarely lubricate them, because if you do, this is the likely result. So it's kind of dissolved away and crumbled away the bit that's supposed to join these two parts together. It's a fairly complex part. There are slots down the side of the part that's missing, this part. There are slots down the side that engage with some little tabs that are on the inside of this gear. So this should go into here, engage with a couple of little tabs, so these two turn as one part. But because this is snapped off, the motor spins and it turns when it's supposed to, so it's not a fault with the electronics, but it doesn't then turn any of the gears, so it's not advancing the tape or the erase ribbon. So I need to find a solution for this, and it's kind of dependent now on what the owner wants to do. This doesn't belong to me. There are a few options here. He's got another machine that may have the same arrangement here. He's currently looking into that. Could be completely different, and we could possibly swap the part off that, but I suspect it will fail in the same way. Similar age machine, and this plastic is I think the designers were very optimistic in the performance of some of these materials, and this just is not really suitable for this purpose. It's always going to fail at this point. It's quite a high inertia motor, so if something goes wrong up here, or if the tape sticks halfway through a cycle, then it's just going to ring the bottom off this. And I don't think that's what's happened. Like I said, I think it's just decayed over time because of possibly something that was put on there. So that's one solution, is to try and find a part we can swap. Now, I somehow suspect that's not really going to be long-term successful. The other thing I'm looking into that I may attempt, and it kind of comes down to what the owner wants to do, is this runs on a post. So on the underside of the carriage, this slides up onto a little post, so it kind of sits on a post like that and rotates. It's quite deep to give this plenty of support. See, we've got this plastic bush that's been pushed into this. What I could do is machine off the gear part and push out the plastic bush, so I end up with just the outer gear, and then make a lower section out of something like brass. Quite a complex thing to make because it's obviously quite small and it has some very narrow slots in it. And I could then bore a hole in the top. It would be the same outside diameter as this white plastic bush, and I could then push it up inside the remaining gear. If I can find a gear somewhere online that's the right size for this, I could even just make the entire thing out of one solid piece of brass and cut a gear at the top, but I don't know if I can find a gear cutter that size, and I don't really want to make one for a one-off repair. I can cut some slots in the bottom section. That's not a big issue. It's 1/2 mil wide, but I've got a 1/2 mil end mill cutter, so I can use that. And that can then be pushed up inside this and bonded to the remaining part of this gear. So that seems like the most promising approach. This is going to be quite brittle, so it'd be quite a balancing act getting the insert tight enough to rotate with this, but not so tight that it just bursts this and it shatters into lots of pieces. I don't even know what will happen if I try and machine the bottom off. It might just disintegrate, but it's no good how it is, so it's probably worth attempting, but it's now down to the owner to decide what he wants me to attempt. Either way, it should be a fairly interesting repair. The rest of it seems to be working fine. It was responding to serial commands. It was just doing weird things when I sent serial commands because I don't know the correct ones to send. If you have one of these, or if you have a manual, then please let me know. If you know what the serial command should be, then again please let me know. I suspect this is defaulted to factory settings, because obviously the batteries have been removed, so all the configuration data will be lost. So if you know how to go about configuring one of these from scratch, then please let me know. Other than that, I want to try and get the rest of the machine working. It does print perfectly from the keyboard, and as I say, it does respond to remote serial data, and I have checked the two serial devices. So these are just the standard 1488 and 1489 devices, and I have checked the inputs and outputs that are connected to the ports, and they're working fine. So chances are it should work fine. Like I say, it does do things when you send commands. It just needs the right commands and setup. So as I say, if you've got any information on this, then please let me know. Otherwise, I shall wait to hear from the owner to see what he wants me to attempt.